John Fain.
On radio, online and on digital.
The Conversation Hour on 774 ABC Melbourne.
And on ABC Victoria.
774 ABC Melbourne.
And now we're joined by Samah Sabawi. She's the spokesperson in Melbourne for Australians for Palestine. She's also a playwright, and a play that she's written will be staged by La Mama in Melbourne a little later this year, called Tales of a City by the Sea. Samah, welcome to the Conversation Hour.
Hi, John.
Wonderful to have your contribution here as well. So from the Palestinian perspective, Ari has been saying, well, look, you know, we've got to start somewhere and we maybe can't even agree on a shared history. What's your view?
I think we can agree on a lot of things if we had the willpower to put behind it. I think the greatest problem came through for me reading Ari's book. And it was reading the part about Lidda, especially where he says that you have to take Zionism with Lidda and you have to embrace Zionism, knowing what happened in Lidda.
And you have to explain to the audience.
And Lidda, of course, is a Palestinian village that was ethnically cleansed in 1984. And Ari...
48.
In 48. And Ari, to his credit, gives a detailed account of the ethnic cleansing process of that Palestinian village in order to pave way for...
It was flattened and the community were moved on.
It was completely devastated in order to build the state of Israel. And he himself says in the book many times, in his book, that Zionism is at odds with having these, with having Lidda and with having Palestinian populations there. The problem is, I've heard him say earlier on the show that Israel has moved on and that we need to move on. But Israel has not moved on from Lidda. We have Lidda still taking place every day. It's taking place in Gaza. It's taking place in the West Bank, where if you look at a map today and look at a map 10 years ago, you'll see the vast expansion of Israeli settlements. So the ethnic cleansing and the removing of Palestinian populations from villages has not stopped. The theft of resources has not stopped. And so the problem becomes, what is Zionism? And Zionism is this idea that the Jewish people should have dominance over the lives of the Palestinians, or rather, maintain a Jewish character of the state, which means that we need to keep the number of Palestinians down in order to build a state that has a majority of the Jewish people. So if that idea continues, and it has not stopped, then how can we say that Israel has moved on when it continues to expand on Palestinian land?
Samah, my real wish is not to get into the old debates and blame games. But let me say two or three things. One, I think that once we acknowledge the fact that the Palestinian must have their free state and the Jewish people must have its right of self-determination in its ancient homeland, once your people will recognize our real rights to have independence, sovereignty, and liberty, and we recognize your peoples to have independence and liberty, that will be the beginning of mutual understanding. Now,
Can I rephrase that, Ari?
Yeah,
Each has to acknowledge the right of the other to have what it wants for itself.
Well,
exactly.
What it wants
is that not reasonable?
No. It's to have a state that is hopefully democratic, that is expressing its national aspirations and rights. But I totally agree with you that Israel is doing many wrong things. I don't agree with the exact description, but I oppose occupation and settlements, and we largely agree on this issue. But please look at the context. Look at the context. There are 130,000 people murdered in Syria, just miles from our border. Wait, just a moment. Women are denied rights throughout the region. Gays are persecuted. Christians are persecuted. You cannot single out from the brutality of the entire region only what Israel does. I will have
Ari, I do want to get a
your
response.
Demands when you acknowledge the brutality of the regional politics.
You're deflecting. You've actually moved the entire discussion elsewhere. So I'm going to bring it back.
Ari,
I'm going to bring it back
please,
to, we were
to speak
talking about
uninterrupted.
the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, which when it started, it did not have problems happening in Syria and Iran. The politics were very different. As you acknowledge in your book, you talk a little bit about the situation in the region at the time. When your grandfather, and you say this, stood on top of the tower, it was in the end of the 1800s. He stood he stood on top of a tower in Ramla, a Palestinian village, and that is when the concept or the project of Zionism began for a lot of people. He looked at the landscape, and you say he didn't see the Palestinians. Quite frankly, I don't know what is worse. Your grandfather not seeing the Palestinians in the end of the 1800s who were before his eyes, or you actually seeing them and acknowledging the atrocities that took place without wanting to take responsibility for the consequences of these atrocities.
Listen, again, I do not want to get into the debate, into this kind of old-style debate. I think that the key for long-term peace, again, I'm doubtful whether we can achieve it in a short time, the key to real understanding and a peaceful solution is, on the one hand, to acknowledge the tragic past of both peoples, to acknowledge the real rights of the both peoples, and to move into kind of some sort of dynamics that gives a future to both peoples. Actually, behind your kind and gentle words, I do not see a recognition of the Jewish people as a real people that has a real right for self-determination in this country, in the Holy Land. Israel, with all its faults, and I'm very critical of our government on many issues, even the right-wing Israeli government accepted the agreements in which we acknowledge the rights of the Palestinian, the people, and the rights of the Palestinians to have a state of their own. Okay. If you recognize right here in this program the right of the Jewish people to have a state of its own in part of the Holy Land, that would be the beginning of peace.
Okay, Samah, and then Rafi is desperate to jump in.
What you're asking me to do is to acknowledge the right of Israel to be an ethnocentric state defined by its Jewish character, a Jewish state for the Jewish people. When you and I know there is a population of indigenous Palestinians who are not Jewish, who live on that land. So for you to be asking, especially after you've written the horrific history that the Palestinian people have suffered through, for you to be asking a Palestinian to give you that, what are you giving back in return for this?
A Palestinian state is not ethnocentric?
No, look at your map.
A Palestinian state is not ethnocentric?
Look at your map. What I think is the way to peace. You've said where you think peace can come from. I think the way to peace is for me to acknowledge you as my equal, and for you to acknowledge me as your equal. If a state of Israel is to have peace, it has to be a state for all its citizens equally, not to prefer the Jewish people above the other citizens in that state.
I'd like to ask you both a question that is kind of what you're debating, but also not. I suppose it's about the future. When I went to Israel and the West Bank last year, and something that always strikes me in the West Bank is how depressed the young people look in the West Bank. And something that's always struck me about Israelis around the world, and they are around the world, they're always, and this is a very personal, very subjective judgment, they often seem to me to be going the hardest. They are the people taking a lot of acid at dawn, listening to the toughest music, in the middle of the Australian bush. On the one hand, that's great, they're awesome, they're very friendly. On the other hand, I see them really struggling with their future. So I know you're having actually what is quite an interesting debate, but how do both, the under-25s on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, I don't see them being very hopeful at all. But that, I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong.
So, first of all, I think that there is, I want to believe, I'm not sure it's there, I want to believe there is some hope in the younger generation on both sides, because globalization does have effect. So people are moving away, in my mind, from old ideologies and ideas, and they want a life for themselves. And yet it's an open battle, because there are darker forces on both sides, and it depends on us, again, on bringing a realistic peace concept in order to have the benign in us prevail over the dark forces. But that has to do with the realistic concept. And actually, I'm afraid that what Samah is offering us is a one-state solution or binational solution, which is something tried in Syria and Iraq and ended in terrible slaughter. Okay, the only way forward is to separate for a while, to have the Palestinians have their state, have the Israelis have their state, and in the long term, hope for the great reconciliation.
Samah.
Okay, I'm not advocating for a one-state solution. I am a realist, and I can see that Israel has enforced a binational apartheid state on the Palestinians, and so I'm calling for equality for all the people who live under Israel's control. So that's a different thing altogether from saying that I advocate for a two-state. To answer your question about the youth, you're right. They're very depressed, and it's not easy to live under occupation. It's not easy to live day in, day out, where you have no future. Even if you finish your education, the possibilities are limited. In Gaza, it's even far worse. I'm telling you than it is in the West Bank. I was there last year, and it was horrible to see all these incredible resources, the young people, the Palestinian people, not getting anywhere. So it is very hard. But I think there is a new movement in Palestine, which is a movement that Israeli Zionists don't like very much. And it's a movement in which it taught the young Palestinians, and more of them are joining, to adopt a civil rights discourse when talking about the occupation. So it's no longer the us and them and the zero sum that it used to be, because Zionism is a zero sum game. And Ari actually makes that clear in his book, that it is at contradiction with having a Palestinian, that's why he keeps calling for acknowledging Israel's right to exist and all of that. So the Palestinian
civil rights idea would appeal to you.
So the Palestinian, well, not really, because what we're asking for is equal vote to Israelis and to Israel.
If you want civil rights, you have to recognize.
You are interrupting, and I'd rather you didn't, and I will give you a chance. Trust me.
So what I really like about what is happening amongst Palestinian youth is that they are adopting a new language in which this language sees the right of the Jewish people to exist with them as equals. There's no eradication going on, and I think that is really something hopeful.
Briefly, because I need to ask Samah, and I want to know about the play, which in fact is what she's come here to talk about as well.
I'm totally into civil rights and civil equality, but one has to acknowledge that so far, in Palestine itself, when in Gaza you have a Hamas-controlled territories which just doesn't respect the rights of women, of gays and Christians who are disappearing. When there is not one settlement there is not one checkpoint, there is no respect for civil rights. And when you look around throughout the region, you do not see respect for civil rights almost anywhere. And therefore, while it is right, and I think that Israel must respect civil rights, we have to do it while realizing that there is a regional problem, and there is a problem, and therefore it cannot be only upheld against Israel. Once you will transform your people, and I'm sure you're committed to these liberal rights, and you will have a real liberal Palestinian movement inward, not only against Israel. That will be the beginning of peace.
You quite rightly said Australia has some problems, which we need to deal with. It is no excuse for Australia not to deal with our indigenous problems, because the region we live in has problems too. That is no excuse for us. We have to judge how we behave by our standards, not by the region's standards. So there's an answer to your question.
First of all, I think with the my entire claim. This is why I think we have to end occupation, and we have to give the Arabs within Israel rights. I totally share that agenda. I think we should do all that. But the context must be clear. And the context, I'm afraid to say, that Israelis do not live the life of Melbourne and Sydney.
No, they don't.
We are threatened. We are not like Australians are not. And yet, I totally agree. We have to make Israel more democratic and even more moral.
Samah, your play is coming up in 3 cities simultaneously, in Gaza on the West Bank, but also here at La Mama in Melbourne. Tell us about the play.
Well, the play is about a love story between a Palestinian who lives in diaspora and a Palestinian in Gaza. And what it is about is, it really is about the difficulties that Palestinians have relating to their loved ones back home and connecting with their loved ones back home. The play will be staged in 3 cities, and that's a symbolic attempt for us to say that we are connected as a people. So there's a cast in Gaza, and there's another cast in the West Bank, and then there's a cast here working on the production, and there's collaboration between the 3. So that's something I'm really looking forward to, and I'm very proud of. I'm really proud of bringing the arts as well into Gaza, my home city, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that in the future.
Does it have a happy ending?
I can't tell you anything about that.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
It is a love story, that's all I can tell you.
Because, I mean, by and large, I think there are, how many generations now? People who live in hope but die without seeing any result. And you have people who are great actors on the stage, and then you have people who are just, caught up in the great passage of history, people whose lives are so disrupted and ruined. In South Africa, we thought there was an impossible situation. It's been not perfectly dealt with. It's being dealt with. Northern Ireland, we thought it was intractable. Look at the progress. Yes, sure, there's a little bit of backwards and forwards here and there, but by and large, people have got what we call the peace dividend to their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Will we see a peace dividend one day to the efforts that so many have devoted to
I
finding
believe
a peaceful solution in the Middle East?
I absolutely, with no doubt, believe that it's going to happen.
In your lifetime?
I hope so. I really hope so. I hope for the sake of my children and for the sake of Ari's children, I don't know if he has children, that this day will come when our people will be able to visit each other without roadblocks in the way, physical or metaphorical roadblocks.
Can I suggest it's more likely to be advanced by culture and art and sport than it is through politics?
I'll say the following. I'm a great believer in my people and in Samah's people. I think that the politics is flawed, the leadership is flawed. I do think there are deep constructive forces, definitely I know about my people, and I hope very much in the Palestinian people. I think that if the life-loving, constructive forces in two societies will prevail, eventually there will be hope.
Just a quick question. So I loved your book, Ari, because it's like a fantastic journey. Is there a Palestinian equivalent, Samah? Is there something that is like that? Yeah.
There's different books. An equivalent, maybe it would be Makdisi's book.
What's his name, sorry?
I'm trying to think of the book.
We'll find it.
I can't come up with the name.
I might tweet
It's an
out
interesting
the name
point. And can your play, if it's on in Gaza and it's on in the West Bank and it's on in Melbourne, but can it be put on in a theatre in Israel?
Yes, as long as it's I would like it to be, but it would have to adhere to certain guidelines that I believe in.
But there's plenty of Palestinian.
Yes, absolutely.
culture
I think
amongst the
it would
Arab
be great
communities.
if the Palestinians put it on in Israel.
And if our national theatre would like to take your play and play
I
it?
would say first you stop oppressing our people, and then you can take our play.
But
So
does
you're
your national
not willing to have goodwill, liberal Israelis?
No, I'm not
actually
willing to be
playing your
bought at
play?
any price. No.
Ari is the Israeli National Theatre. Does it have no Palestinians working in it?
Look, of course it does. I mean, all of Israel. Let's talk again. Israel has its problem, but I'll give you just an example, a vulgar example. In Israel's reality programs on television lately, on several contests, song, singing, cookery, whatever, Palestinians were the winners. So there is talking of change. There is a change. On the one hand, we have dark forces, but there is a kind of new civil atmosphere that is more open-minded.
So,
and
Samah,
therefore, I think that if Samah's play will be played in one of our main theatres, it will be a great contribution.
A co-production?
No, never. Not until Israel stops oppressing the Palestinian people. It really is as simple as it was during the South Africa era, when people refused to invest or to cooperate with a state that was based on apartheid. I, as a Palestinian, will not invest or collaborate with an Israeli institution until the occupation of my people ends, and my people are seen as equal human beings to the Jews in Palestine.
And so for those in the Israeli community, those who make that concession, but they may not be a majority, then they don't have that opportunity for that.
It's different. Look,
Joint
it's different. No, the expectation is different for Israelis who are Palestinians, Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel. It's a very different expectation of what they can and can't do, or should or shouldn't do. And at the end of the day, it's a personal choice, and I can only speak for me.
I persist in being naive and optimistic and thinking that so much goodwill can be achieved by getting people to sit down to share meals, to share cultural events.
There's nothing that stops us from doing that, as long as it's not funded by the State of Israel. I sat outside with Ari and had a great conversation.
I'm told our best work happens in the airlock. I do understand
I
that.
hope that dialogue will prevail over boycotts.
And this can always be a little opening. Samah, keep us posted on the progress with your play coming up later in the year. Tales of a City by the Sea will be coming to a production at La Mama. Samah Sabawi is the official spokesperson for Australians for Palestine. Ari Shavit's book, My Promised Land, brings him through the Sydney Writers' Festival to speak at Monash Caulfield campus as well. And Rafi Epstein has been my co-host on this optimistic, I'm going to say, conversation hour, maybe naively so.